Welcome to Steve Savant's Money, the name of the game. Hi everyone, I'm your host, Steve Savant, syndicated financial columnist and money gamer extraordinaire. For many Americans, their home is their largest asset. Today we're talking about buying a home with real estate expert, Mike Bodeen. Welcome to the show, Mike.
Hey, thanks Steve, appreciate you asking me to be on.
I'm glad you're on, and I have to say, especially for all our advisors that are watching this show, I think we kind of forget that for most Americans, their home is their largest asset. And I'd have to say, from an advisor point of view, I don't think we're really that up to speed on buying a home, what it takes. And if our client comes to us and says, give us some advice, I usually go, talk to my real estate agent.
Yeah.
So talk to me about that.
And Steve, that in itself is actually not a bad strategy because there are some very important things that the buyer can do to be able to make it act as that investment. And one thing just kind of at the beginning to underscore here is that there are different strategies that buyers can take to obviously get a good deal. But for buying a house, the most important thing, and I'm sure if your folks are married, their wives would agree or their spouses would agree with this, it's like they want the right house. So for a buyer that we're going to be talking about here, getting the right house is most important.
Okay, so I've always heard locations is king, and that's a big deal. Is it as big as everybody says it is?
It absolutely is.
So it's a big deal. And how many of when you see a purchase, is it more driven by the female of the married couple than the male?
It is indeed.
What would you give me just a kind of a guess? I won't hold it to you. About, what is it, 70, 80%?
You know, to be an approximation would be 83.42%.
Wow, that's a very deep approximation. Thank you, Mr. Spock. Now, I want to talk about, some of the things that I look at. You say in some of your notes that I look here that cash is still king.
Yes.
I mean, if you have the cash to buy out and you can close and there's no contingencies, isn't that like nirvana for the deal to be made?
Steve, that's as good as it gets.
It doesn't get
sure.
any better.
It doesn't.
All right, but let's say most Americans, I can't really cut a check for the full value of the home. And I want the home, so I need to go ahead and make sure before I even walk on the street and find out, am I going to be able to get a mortgage?
Yes.
And you told me about this thing that you can actually pre-qualify for that in advance.
Actually, the word more accurately is to get pre-approved. The generic term out there is pre-qualified, and you'll hear that 9 times out of 10. But the best lenders out there, what they're going to do on behalf of their client is they're going to get them pre-approved. Now that's a process. It is the process of actually going through, filling out the application, the credit checks, and actually getting an approval from the lender, subject to getting the house. Because if you're approved, if the buyer borrower is approved, now the only thing you're doing is the best part, and that's looking for the house.
Now I've noticed that with the approval now, I'm still going to have to match up. I'm going to have this home looked at and and have it evaluated for a price tag.
Correct.
Now, if you've seen that over the years, you've been in this thing for what, 30-something years, Mike?
35, 37.
35. So you've been around. You've seen how many inspections have you had to sit through?
Thousands.
Thousands. When you look at how important is it to get the right inspector for the house that you're going to buy?
Well, it is everything, and it's because we've seen bad inspections and good inspections, and having a good inspector will either save you from making a gross mistake in buying that house, or it can actually make you money, because there's really 2 points of negotiation in every real estate transaction. At the beginning, a buyer is negotiating price and terms. But then one more, there's down the line, you have your inspection period, what we call here in Arizona the due diligence period. And a buyer here, as in probably most places, has a certain period of time, 10 to 14 days, in which to have that home inspected on every different level possible. And then to take those results that they have from that and then go back to the seller and say, Mr. or Mrs. Seller here, these are the things that we found that are not acceptable to me. Let's talk.
Or it could actually kill the deal. He could say, I'm walking.
No, actually the seller, interestingly enough, at least in Arizona, now I don't know, all states are different. In Arizona, the seller does not have the right to walk. The buyer has the right to walk.
Well, now you talk about this, I've heard you talk about this, making the right offer. Everybody's, and let's just for today, let's just not get into, hey, is it a buyer's market or a seller's market?
Right.
Let's just say we're in a kind of a neutral market, and if I have to go as a buyer, I have to make the right offer.
Yep.
And it can't be a ridiculous offer. It has to be somewhere in the game. How does he even determine that? How does a buyer go to a real estate agent and determine that?
Well, really what the real estate agent should be doing And let's also just clarify our terms here. I'll use the term realtor because both in whether a realtor is representing a buyer or a seller, a realtor is different than a real estate agent. Most people think of, well, that every real estate agent is a realtor. Not so.
I did not know that.
Yeah, realtor is the national trade group, the National Association of Realtors. Now, why is that important? Well, it's important because we're accountable. Is if buyer has a problem with us as agents, they can actually, there's a process that they can take us to with our peers. So that makes a difference. So, but coming up with the right price of a home, that's where the importance of a realtor is important. You want to be able to have that realtor actually go as far as doing an appraisal for you. It's like, well, what is the house worth? Because what the agent will do, what the realtor will do, is they will prepare a market analysis. And you've probably heard that term around there. And that's basically getting comparable sales. And that realtor will sit down with you, the buyer, and go over it and look at those. And it is important that there be some knowledge with regards to these comparable sales. And because otherwise, a lot of it is just kind of on paper, and you know, what does that mean? So having a knowledge of these comparable sales is very important, because that's what the appraiser will use to determine the value of the home on behalf of the lender. So whereas I may even say sell a house and get a whopping price, maybe even $10,000 over market value, if the appraiser for the lender says it's not worth that, guess what? Deal goes south. Or there's definite renegotiation.
When we come back from the break, we're going to talk more about some of the issues like home warranties and things of that nature. Because if you're buying a house, it's the largest asset you're going to have. You'll want to know what to do and how to do it. We'll be right back with more from Mike right after the break.
Take a close look at your hard-earned dollar. How do you think your money's doing? Are you keeping an eye on it? Is it protected from taxes, inflation, and market risk? Over time, those Washingtons could become Franklins. With tax-advantaged indexed universal life from one of the largest distributors of indexed universal life, Ash Brokerage.
Welcome back to the second segment. We're with Mike Bodeen, an expert, been in business 35 years in real estate. Mike, I have to say, when I see a home that you want, and you want it, and you're willing to make an offer, maybe above what they're asking. I mean, you've seen that before, because it's the house maybe of your dreams.
Yep.
If I'm going to position myself, I want to still make the best value buy I can. How do I go about that if I'm a little over anxious and I'm trying to cool my jet so I don't throw my wallet out there?
Yes. Great question. Well, Steve, I think the important thing is for your agent, for your professional, your realtor, to be able to actually get in touch with the other realtor representing the seller and have a discussion with that seller saying, you know, my client's interested in maybe making an offer on this and wanted just to find out about, you know, kind of where your seller's at as far as, do they need a quick close, and engage that other agent in conversation to be able to obtain as much information as possible.
Does that happen a lot?
Well,
realtor and
it's
realtor?
my practice. I don't know.
It is?
You know, I'm sure with others it is as well. But that's one of the most important things that we can do on behalf of our client.
So
Find
really,
out
you're
what's
kind
going
of
on.
doing a recon with the other agent.
Yeah, absolutely.
Let me ask you this. I noticed that you said something that really caught my eye, and I want you to kind of expound on it. It says, sometimes it's not about the price. Sometimes the terms override the actual price. Which I thought, wow, how can that be?
Yeah. Well, for example, let's say a seller, who's selling their house. We never know, and unless you talk with the other agent, we never know what their situation is. They may have just had a death in the family. They may have just gotten notice that he's being transferred and they need to be out and, across country in 3 weeks. And so unless we can actually engage with that other professional, then we really don't know, all the possible motivations. So things like the closing time. You may have a seller that wants a long closing time. Now, here in Arizona, for example, a typical closing time might be 30 to 45 days. But let's say a seller wants 90 days. That seller will probably be more apt to give a break on price if you give them the terms as far as the closing period.
When I'm looking at some of the things of not only the closing period, maybe also the earnest money, this seems
Yes.
to be a big deal.
Yeah.
How much do I show? If I'm showing earnest, am I showing good faith? Do I have to put down 1%,
Right.
3%? What's the number
Yeah,
that shows the other
a,
buyer?
that's a great question. Well, I can tell you the way that I do it is, first of all, I'm not that concerned about the initial deposit. I generally do it around 1%. So if it's a $500,000 house, around $5,000. Now, where it does come into play will be after your 10-day or 14-day inspection due diligence period. Now, after that, if we're going to go further, then I think it's a good practice to be able to increase, for the buyer to increase their deposit, maybe taking them from $5,000 to $10,000 or even $20,000. And if you put that in the initial contract, that the buyer will increase their deposit, say to $20,000 within 3 days of the due diligence period, now the seller looks at that and go, that's pretty good, you know. But until that time, for that first 10 to 14 days, really, quite honestly, that deposit is, at least in Arizona, it's really irrelative because the buyer can walk for any reason.
When I'm looking at constructing my final offer, we're getting down to terms. We've been back and forth. You're spending money. You're talking about not enough money
Yes.
to even worry about, and yet we go through these negotiation issues.
Well, that's something that I advise both my buyers and my sellers, that you need to check your emotions at the door, and you need to look at what the goal is. Remember, for the buyer, getting the right house. I cannot tell you, unfortunately, there have been too many times where I've seen a buyer get too cute in their negotiations, wanting to be Mr. Strategy, and guess what? They lost. They didn't get the house that the missus really wanted. How well do you think that went over?
Not good.
And then you have to actually try to find another house to replace the one they lost.
Talk about home warranties. I mean, I think this is becoming part of the game now, isn't it? I mean, this has been for a long time. When you're buying a home warranty, and this is good, and the seller usually picks this up at the settlement.
Yes, yes.
Talk about home warranties. How important are they for the buyer?
Well, they're very important, and most sellers, 9 out of 10 sellers at least, are willing to be able to provide one at their cost to the buyer, because even a seller recognizes that this is a good thing. We can't really control so well what happens after close of escrow. The air conditioning, especially here in Arizona, that goes out 3 days after it closes. You know, that's not that great, but then you can call a home warranty company, they'll come right out and fix it. So they are, the only time we don't see a home warranty actually in a contract here is if a buyer says, you know what, I'm going to pay for that myself. I'm just going to I'm going to give the price to the seller, and I'm going to give them everything that they want, because I want that house, and I'll pick up the cost of that.
So if you're really interested in buying a new home, or maybe a used one, of course, or an existing home, you're going to be able to sit there, and your best option, especially if you really love the home and it's a great location and the missus really loves it, one of the biggest things I can see, you say, get those contingencies off your paper, try to get everything that you can, so that seller's going to jump on it.
Exactly, exactly.
Well, that's our show for today. I want to thank Mike Bodeen for being my special guest and today's money mentor. And keep in mind, before moving forward with any of the ideas on our show, always consult your tax advisor or your legal counsel. And don't forget, you can email me, steve@thenameofthegame.tv. And remember, as the good Reverend John Wesley once said, make all you can, save all you can, give all you can. I'm Steve Savant. I'll see you next week.